Welcome back, everybody, to the Capital Contribution Live subset of the Fund CPA Network. Today on the show, we got Dennis McNamara. Did I say that right? Last name?
Dennis McNamara.
There we
Nailed
go.
it.
Dennis is a wealth advisor with his own firm, combining health and wealth together into one. I am your host, Yuri Kapilovich, owner and operator of Kapilovich and Associates, and as well known, the Fund CPA. And by well known, I mean probably to myself.
I know you. I know you.
There you go. So what the idea behind the show is, it's stuff you should have learned in high school. And we're bringing it to the basics, the absolute basics, because we don't want to make any assumptions that our listeners know things that we know, right? And I think it's very common in my experience that we might know something. I might know something about taxes that nobody else does, and especially from the financial planning perspective. And I think this episode, we're going to make this a series with you because we're going to probably have a couple.
We could go in a lot of different directions on this one, man.
But this is so important, man. You know, you hear terms like 401k, budgets, investments, income, expenses. What does it all mean? And what should I invest my money into? Man, we can just do what should I invest my money into?
Yeah, a lot of rabbit holes here.
For 7 hours straight. So let's start with, the introduction to you. How do you become a financial advisor? What kind of background do you have?
Yeah.
Where'd you go to school? Take us through the journey, man.
Yeah, it's a long and windy one. I don't know how deep we want to go there. It's some ugly parts too, maybe.
Of course. We'll save those for later.
We'll get a drink after.
Yeah, there you go.
No, Dennis McNamara. I'm a partner. I'm one half of the Wealth Advisors team, and that's Wealth, as you kind of mentioned and alluded to, right? It's WHEALTH,
yes.
Wealth Advisors. Yeah, but my beginnings as and I even there's this weird. It almost is like semantics, but like financial advisor. I really there's this weird thing where I put this hat on and I just identify more as a financial planner.
Yeah,
because and I think it has something to do with the industry that I work in, but. When I was first having an interest in this field, I went to Rutgers University.
I would go. Me too.
Let's go, baby. Are you? When I first was even having a passing curiosity in this and figuring out, is this something I want to do, right? Financial advising. What are your options when you're in your early 20s? You have no experience. True. You need to get it under your belt. You know who's hiring?
Who's that?
Insurance companies.
Yeah, they are.
And
that's true.
So what did I do, right? I found a financial advisory internship kind of a thing, and I go to a Northwestern Mutual.
Oh, my brother worked there.
And I'm not, so I'll have to be careful in what I say about this. But what they had me do is list out 200 contacts.
All right.
200 people.
Yeah.
And I go to my next interview, and I share the list. I'm like, I made this list of 200 people that I know. They're like, all right, well, you're going to start picking up the phone and calling all them and selling them insurance.
Ooh.
And I said, that is bonkers. That is bonkers. That just was nuts to me that I didn't know anything about financial advising, and I'm being asked to go out to sell a financial product to the people closest to me that have my trust, and it just rubbed me the wrong way.
True.
And
I felt like me and Cutco. You ever heard of Cutco now?
It is Cutco with it's a different product. It's the same sale.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. I remember this, man. I was sitting there in high school. They target you, man.
Oh, I went to a 101 for Cutco because I got it in the mail telling me about how much I could make.
Ooh, yeah. Tell me, did you actually go?
I did not actually end up pursuing it, but and I didn't pursue the Northwestern Mutual opportunity either.
All right, I see. But it was it's so distinct. I remember this now. This is at this point 16 years ago, and I still remember their sales pitch, which was there was this knife, and you're supposed to hit it at the table.
Yeah. And
then it makes a sound, and and they go, "Oh, are you into music? Do you know what key that is or note? And then they're like, "No, what is it?" And you go, "B sharp," because Cutco knives will always be sharp.
Oh God.
But throw up from that.
Yeah. Well, I think that was.
But I remember it to this day. That's how.
But that's been a thread like that.
Yeah.
Being adverse to selling has been something that's almost part of my DNA today. And today, I could probably be behooved by leaning into what I'm selling more because it's now something I'm just so genuine about.
Right.
But there was something, and I think it's just for anybody who's even thinking about financial advising, being an investment manager, like doing personal finance where people are hiring you to do that.
Yeah.
So many of the options available to get started are coming from a place of products and sales. And I think that was the biggest hurdle for me, and something that I went to school for finance, for economics, for management, and I just was like so certain that I wanted to be a financial planner. But going through the process of trying to get my foot in the door became such a big turnoff that I actually went a different direction originally.
Wow.
And ended up coming back. And I think that, something for those that are, again, with having a curiosity in the space is there's different worlds. And like, I didn't realize this when I was going in. There are broker dealers.
Yep.
Where you have to, and I was at a firm when I originally started that was a hybrid. It was part broker dealer, part registered investment advisory firm. Those are different. They're treated differently.
Yeah.
A broker dealer, you're selling things.
Yeah.
You're making money through a product that you're putting a customer into.
Right.
And there was something that just never sat well with me. That just felt like such an inherent conflict of interest when I've got this person's trust, but I'm making money based on something that I'm going to tell them to buy.
Totally.
And that was always a really tough point for me, which is why I had to go in a different direction.
And I get 50, 100 a month of these, people, put you in insurance and, get your clients into insurance. Annuities.
Oh, yeah. CPAs, that's not uncommon. That's a revenue stream for a CPA office.
And
for sure.
I refuse.
Totally.
I cannot benefit off of advising or giving to someone something that I'm going to take a cut off of. It doesn't feel clean to me. I hate it.
Yeah.
But the point is, it's so important to understand these things is you're being sold this information, right? They're profiting off of what they're selling you.
Yeah.
How much is this really benefiting me? Is it really good for me?
Yeah. Whose interests are number one?
Yeah. Whose interests are number one? Because, am I making this guy a millionaire? Or am I going to be, in a good financial position when I retire, or whatever it is that's being sold? So, this is exactly the meat and potatoes, and the reason why I wanted to have you on the show too.
Yeah, and I think because I think for anybody who's watching or listening, like this isn't even you want to be a financial advisor, but it's what should you be looking for?
Yes,
because there's a lot of unscrupulous things going on in this space. It's the number one reason why I'm so cynical about my colleagues in this industry, because I see so much of the ugly. I see so many of the conflicts of interest, these kickbacks, the commissions, like all the things that the client or the prospect, whoever they might be, isn't privy to that's going on behind the scenes and is informing the advice sometimes that they're receiving. Yeah. And so I think, one thing, whether it's somebody who's interested in the career path or somebody who's looking for an advisor to work with, you want to look at like organizations like NAPFA, which is NAPFA.org, which is just for fiduciary planners.
Okay.
And then I would say one step even above that is the fee-only network. That's feeonlynetwork.com, I believe, where those are advisors that the only compensation they get are the checks their clients cut them. Wow. So clients are paying their advisors for objective advice to get them from point A to Z with the least amount of drag, the least amount of commissions, the least amount of BS, and getting the information that's actually, best for them. Yeah. And that to me, that's been part of my journey, right? Because I was in an area where that wasn't the case. Yeah. And now I'm in the place where the only money I'm making, I have clients, insurance, however we feel about it, is typically going to be necessary. Well, you're a homeowner, right? You have homeowner's insurance.
Absolutely.
You've got a car. You need car insurance. Yep. You've got a young son, just like me. We should have life insurance, right? Yep. Because we've got a spouse that if we were to disappear, our lost income over a lifetime needs to be replaced. However, we shouldn't be getting those products based on somebody's incentive to sell them to us. Correct. We should be getting those products based on what's best for us. And there's a whole universe of professionals that work where that's, the paradigm has shifted a little bit and the incentive structure has shifted so that it's just about getting what the client needs, not what, you're going to make the best commission on. Yeah, that's some really good stuff. I usually save, it's funny, you save the part where, how to pick the financial advisor, but this is so important that I think, I love that we ended up talking about it on the front end. And I think the other thing about it that is important is also understanding the products themselves. Sure. Again, insurance is important. And again, I understand what insurance is. I know what life insurance is.
I personally, the different kinds and all that, which we'll get into probably in a different episode.
Yeah.
But again, understanding the products that you have the ability to sell, and then as a client, understanding what it is like number one to me.
Totally.
Because I've probably had about 8 to 10 conversations with different advisors, some of whom I knew a little better, some of whom I had a better rapport with. But even then, if I don't know the product, I don't really know if you're selling me whatever it is. I'm just going off of trust alone.
Totally.
Which is great.
Yeah.
But I think there has to be another component to it, which is why we're here.
Well, yeah. It's education, right?
Yeah,
because at the end of the day, like my wife is a dentist.
Yeah.
And
Awesome.
how she approaches, think of like a doctor-patient relationship.
Yeah.
She's going to tell you what she sees, right?
Yeah.
What is your situation? And that's going to inform the diagnosis. Well, the diagnosis could be one of 3 things. And the idea is to empower you to make, as a doctor, she's trying to empower her patient to make
I love that.
a decision about their health. It's not that they should pick option A.
Yeah.
It's that they have option A, B, and C. They come with different pros and cons, different costs, all these considerations. And as an advisor, right, that's how I think it should be done, where you should be informed, educated, and empowered to make the decision you feel is best.
I love it. I love it. And man, that's so let's dive into it. I want to kind of take a step, and I'm trying to think of the best place to start, right? Wrapping the concept, wrapping my head around, taking my own biases out of the picture. I'm a CPA. I've been dealing with in my career people making $50 to $100 million a year.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And when you're starting to deal with that, you're almost at a beginning point that's a little bit above, and I want to bring it down. I want to take out my own experiences and go to what does the person who's listening right now, how can they stand to receive value from this?
Totally.
Right? The basic person that's working a job, working a W-2, let's talk about budgeting.
Yeah.
Because I think I think that then we're going to jump into a couple other things, but let's talk about budgeting. What is budgeting? Can you explain budgeting to the average person who works a W-2 job? Let's say they're making $50,000 a year. So take it away.
Yeah. I'm almost into like reverse budgeting.
All right.
So with
like that.
The concept being that what's your main priority, right? Mm-hmm. Well, for a lot of us, it's going to be just making sure that we don't end up on the street. Okay.
Yep.
Well, let's start there. What is that going to require? Well, you've got a job. Maybe your wife's got a job. You've got a child. All right. Well, if something happens to you or your wife, how does that impact making the monthly mortgage?
Yeah.
How does that impact paying the daycare? How does that? Okay. So let's start there. We need to have an emergency fund.
I like that.
All right. So like, no ifs, ands, or buts. I'm not having an investment conversation with anybody until I see that they have, if they're a married couple and they're both working, I want them to have 3 months of their living expenses all in. So that's groceries, that's utilities, that's the daycare, that's the mortgage. I want them to have that in a war chest off to the side, ideally like a high yield savings account.
Okay.
This is money that they shouldn't ever need to touch, hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully never need to touch.
But we know, like life's unpredictable.
Yeah.
Curveballs happen. We get derailed. We get in a car accident, and all of a sudden we're out of work for a period of time, whatever it might be. Yep. So the ideal is like it's a minimum of 3 months.
Okay.
Ideally, I love, and this is usually something that's done over years, is to accumulate that to be closer to 6 to 12 months.
Okay.
But so I say that is step one. So when it comes to the budget, if I don't see an emergency fund,
we're not talking.
We're not talking about all the other areas. It's saying, how do we get this money in there? How can we start skimming some money off the top to go there? And that then brings us to kind of the second point, because that habit of filling that up, that emergency fund, is going to be the same habit that you do.
I like that.
To start building up the foundation, right? And that's the concept, and you might be familiar with, like, pay yourself first.
Yeah, profits first, right?
Profits first, but pay yourself first, right? Like, you're investing in you at the end of the day, in your future self.
That's right.
To be able to, right? And this gets, and not to get like down a philosophical rabbit hole, but like, money at the end of the day is a means to an end.
True.
Right? It's not the end itself.
Yeah.
And if we lose sight of that, a lot of times in the short term, it's going to mean that maybe we're making some less than intentional uses of that money because it's just sitting in our pocket. It's burning a hole. And what I would rather see is the same idea with filling an emergency fund. Maybe that's taking, when you get that $50,000 example, I can't do the math in my head if they're getting paid biweekly, what their net ends up coming out on.
Let's just say 3,500.
3,500
a month.
Okay. So, 15% of that, 20% of that, right off the top, isn't money that is yours.
I like that.
It's money that is going to your CYA, covering your butt in the event that you need it for the emergency. And once that's all set up, it's then for your future self, where you're starting to build that, that snowball that's going to, by investing, is going to be able to compound and start picking up speed as it rolls downhill over the, the coming decades.
I like that. I think one of the biggest challenges that we have now, kind of as a society almost, I think, is the social media phenomenon.
Yeah. Comparing ourselves to others.
Comparing ourselves to others. Seeing information in 60-second, 30-second clips that will make people stop what they're doing, derail them from their plan. They might be on your awesome, really love the idea here, 15%. Let's call it 10% even of 3,500 is 350.
Sure.
350 a month right off the top. So what Dennis is saying is, if your net from a $50,000 salary, your net every month is $3,500. What Dennis is recommending, let's call it 10%, that'll be $350.
I would say 15 to 20. But I think starting with anything is the right start, right?
Yeah.
So whether we still want to say 10%, but I think it's always about trying to get that dial to turn up.
I got you. So let's just say
easy math though is 10%.
Easy math 10%. That's probably why I did it. Honestly, I don't feel like doing math right now. So so we're talking about 10%. That's 350. So take the 350 as soon as you get that check. And if it's bi-weekly, meaning 2 times a month, then you take 175, I think the math is, and put that away into another account, a high yield savings account or something like that. And the reason for that is you want to feel like that's not your money. Right?
Yeah.
So get into the habit of that, right?
Yeah. Well, and I would also just say, right, because if you don't have that, what's the alternative? When that curveball comes and you do get derailed for a period of time, what's the alternative? You know what the alternative is for most people?
What's that?
Swiping the credit card.
I was going to say credit.
And now we're talking double-digit interest rates, 20% plus, and now you've got this. You're spiraling down.
Yeah.
As opposed to, where your investments can help you spiral up, you're spiraling down, and you're going to be in a hole faster than you realize.
Yeah.
Just because you weren't prepared to take a hit.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think, and again, to go back to that social media phenomenon, you got people, somebody is on social media, hey, put the high yield savings account, do that 6 months, 10 months. You're so confused, for the emergency fund. A 6-month emergency fund. That's what I know a lot of people saying. Yeah. But I love it. Be realistic.
Yeah.
3 months is fine. Start somewhere.
Start somewhere.
But how do you get there, right? Somebody who has $0 in their bank account and is spending everything that they're taking in is probably not doing the budgeting very well, right? But they need to get to this 3-month cushion,
or
emergency fund. But how do they do that? Like, all you see online is just do this.
Yeah.
You need to have this. You need to have this investment account. You need to have life insurance. You need to have that. Like, I almost wish that there was a way to just block that out.
Yeah.
And speak to someone who's a human being who will tell you. So this is the idea, right? So you take your 3,500. Let's just call it 10%. The 350, and you're putting it away into this separate account that you're not going to touch unless, God forbid, there's an emergency.
So it's to get in. What is the cost of your life on a monthly basis, all in? When you pay your credit cards, when you pay the mortgage or the rent, whatever it might be, the student loans. When you lay out all of those things, all right, that's $3,000 a month. Yeah, let's get $9,000 set aside before we even start talking about the more ambitious long-term things. Because if we don't have that, that's going to be the thing that actually. Not having the emergency fund is going to take away from future you, because you're going to have to all of a sudden start pulling some strings.
Yeah. Sell stocks.
Totally. And we can't decide. Yeah. Like this year's been a rough year in the stock market.
Yeah.
Imagine you got derailed now and you didn't have an emergency fund. You're selling stocks mostly at a loss.
Wow. Yeah.
So, you're giving yourself a cushion to succeed.
Yeah.
Which is just, it's going to be, if we're all playing a long game.
Yeah, we are.
So we need to start. It's like, how do you eat an elephant? Right? One bite at a time. We need to just chip away at these things.
Yeah, that makes sense. So why don't you give us, again, just to go back to the basics of the budgeting, how do we figure out what our budget is? How do we even start the process of figuring out what our expenses are and what is our net discretionary income?
Yeah, well, I guess, looking at a pay stub is usually one of the best places to start.
Okay.
Because you see, right, your
Yeah.
FICA taxes, your Social Security, your Medicare.
Yeah.
You see your federal and state taxes if state taxes are relevant to you. You see any of the insurance deductions that you mentioned.
Yeah.
And if you're working a W-2 job, hopefully you've got medical, maybe dental,
Yeah,
vision, things like this.
Right.
You might even have like group term life. You might have a little bit of life insurance through work. That
Yeah.
usually is maybe 1x your salary.
Yeah.
And are you contributing to like a 401k plan
Right.
through work, right? So you back all this out and now you've got your net number. All right, well, you got your net number. Now we need to look at what does your life cost you,
Yeah.
right?
How do
And
you figure that out?
and I always like to start with the biggest ones. So for most people, it's going to be either your rent and mortgage. Like I mentioned before, my wife, as a dentist,
Yeah.
has a over 6-figure student loan,
Oof.
right?
Yeah.
So that student loan payment is one of our biggest payments. For us, childcare
Yeah.
is probably the next one
I
down.
can relate to all those.
Totally. And then if you keep working down the list, for me personally, most of my other expenses are just on my credit card. And I pay my credit card off in full. So if I just take my 2 credit card statements, my primary credit cards,
Yeah.
and I look, I can see my Spotify subscription,
Yeah.
right? I can see a lot of the things, my groceries.
Yeah.
And if I just take that over a year, and let's be honest, right? Life's not linear.
Mhm.
I just paid my annual life insurance premiums this month.
Ooh.
Well, that only happens once a year,
Right.
right? So that was one payment done in this month. Well, when I smooth out all of those expenses, maybe we're in October. Now,
Yeah.
October might look a little different than
Right.
November. And let's be honest, December with the holiday season, all this, my mom's birthday,
Right.
December might look like a more expensive month compared to some of the other ones. But if you get a general sense,
Yeah.
you then can have an idea, all right, outside of some of these lumpy expenses in
Right.
general, because there's a difference here. We've got our fixed expenses, the things that are recurring every single month,
Yeah. The same. Yeah.
right?
Same
Our
expense.
mortgages,
Yep. That doesn't.
our daycare, our student loan, our Netflix subscription, our Spotify,
Right.
whatever it is.
Right.
Those are the ones. Those are super predictable.
Yeah.
And then there's everything else, which is the variable, the summer vacation, the
Right.
holiday gifts, whatever it might be. But if we can get a general idea, we can kind of prepare for those things in advance too, so they don't shock us with that next credit card bill after the month is done.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think it's important to understand what are your monthly fixed expenses
Yep.
that keep happening, like rent, like you said, mortgage, and what are the things that are going to change and what causes them to change. Groceries is probably pretty fixed if you're going to the grocery store every 2 weeks.
You can get a ballpark
And
range.
you get a ballpark
Yeah.
range, but especially with the inflation and things like that going up, that might adjust a little bit and might surprise some people.
Right.
Gas, if somebody's listening and they're working from home, well, their gas expense has been reduced tremendously from before COVID.
Yeah,
You know,
but maybe their air conditioning over the summer, right, was
Right.
through the roof.
True.
Because energy prices are up, and maybe they're
Yeah.
they're connected to gas and whatever it might be.
Absolutely. So you're talking about utilities, you're talking about gas, you're talking about just your cost of living, groceries,
Yep.
rent,
Yep.
childcare if you have any. And all of these are expenses that potentially offset basically your income.
Yeah.
And you're trying to get to and figure out how much are you able to save on a monthly basis,
Yeah.
because that amount might jump up and down, especially does for me, is like entertainment, right? Like going out to eat and stuff like that. What's your recommendation on kind of controlling those expenses?
Well, I think that's why I kind of started with the idea of reverse budgeting,
Right.
right? Because when you're paying yourself first, all right, you got the emergency fund all set.
Yeah.
You're participating maybe 5% to get your company match in the 401k.
Right.
That's not enough, right? That's 5%. So you got your emergency fund set aside,
Yep.
and now you're only putting 5% away to the 401k.
Yeah.
Let's start with what's important. What's important is your future self at this point. So we need to dial that 5% ideally up to at least 15%. Does it need to go into the 401k? Well, not necessarily.
Yeah.
I mean, depending on your tax bracket, maybe it makes more sense to put it in, and we can start splitting hairs here, but
Yeah.
maybe some into a Roth IRA.
Right.
Right? Or maybe you need that money to be accessible within 5 to 10 years from now for a big purchase or something that you have in mind. Maybe it's a taxable brokerage account.
Yeah.
Whatever it might be, either way, you're starting with the goal,
Right.
the savings goal. And then when we get into, all right, how should we budget? For me,
Yeah.
I moved from like Wall Street,
Yeah,
that side of working with a minimum client that's a $10 million client.
Yeah.
I was in a world where numbers are just getting thrown all around. And it was, my job was to get them an extra zero. Well, now when I work more with people on Main Street, these are real life people. And I don't care. I'm never asking them, what do you spend on your groceries?
Yeah.
What do you spend on your utilities? No. What I'm saying is, what's the goal?
Yeah.
The goal is for us to hit our savings numbers,
Right.
our investment numbers, and everything after that, live.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
How I spend my money and how you spend your money, you've got this amount in entertainment, I've got that amount in entertainment, right? Whatever it might be. As the planner, I don't care. I just need to make sure that we're steering the ship in the right direction. I think that's just applicable
Love that.
on a personal finance level. Set money aside for future you. Whatever's left, that's yours to live. Maybe you want to live in a nicer house than me.
Yeah.
Well, that might mean that I have more money to travel.
Right.
Right?
Whatever. Yeah.
So I think if you start with that, the remainder is what's available to do the things and to make a life.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that. I like that a lot because I think that it's very important. If you're saving putting the money away towards future you for last,
right? There's never enough.
There's never enough.
You start with that.
Yeah. If you start with that, and now you're budgeting backwards.
Exactly.
You're saying, okay, now I'm left with not that much for my personal, expenses, call it entertainment.
Yeah.
And you can control that part.
And maybe it forces you to pick and choose, right?
Yeah, I like.
Are you going to eat out X amount of times a week, or are you going to turn that dial back because you want to save up and go on that trip, that vacation, whatever it might be?
Yeah. So, we chatted a little bit. You mentioned 401k, company match. You mentioned Roth IRA. And then you mentioned this thing called a taxable brokerage account.
Yes.
So let's go to the 401k conversation because I think that ties pretty nicely with a W-2 job.
Sure.
Most of the time you get your offer letter. You get really excited about it. It says 401k match, 3% match on a 401k. So walk us through what's a 401k and what does a match mean?
Sure. So a 401k is kind of like you kind of alluded to, right? If you have a W-2 job, and even if you don't, you can be self-employed and have a 401k. But simplicity here, let's talk about, the average person is working a W-2 job.
Yep.
And if they're lucky, they've got a 401k. That is an account. So if you make $50,000 and you don't contribute to a 401k, when you report your taxes, your income is $50,000.
That's right.
Let's just say you put 10% away. So you're putting $5,000 into the 401k. All right. Well, now when you report your taxes at tax time, it actually on paper for the IRS's, consideration is going to look like you made $45,000. So you essentially reduced your taxable income, or really your gross income,
right,
and lowered your taxes in the process. And oh, by the way, you're putting it into essentially a container, the 401k, that is also tax deferred.
Right.
So let's just say, in a lot of 401k plans, people get sometimes caught up with, I don't know what to invest in.
Right.
Well, fortunately, this space was the Wild West for a long time.
Yeah.
But it's really started to kind of come to a point where even if you don't choose an investment, 98 out of 100 employers are going to have a default option that it puts you in. And that's typically going to be a mutual fund that is aligned to your target retirement date. So maybe for us, that's, 2050, right?
Yeah.
Where over the years, if you don't touch that 401k, if you don't do anything, that investment is actually kind of reallocating and growing with you and changing appropriately with your age over time.
Right.
They're not a silver bullet. I think, they can oversimplify things sometimes, but to get started, they're a great option.
Awesome.
They're low fee, and you're not paying any tax on dividends, capital gain distributions, any of these things.
Right. Yeah. And so you mentioned tax deferred. Tax deferred means that you're not paying the tax as the account is growing.
Right.
So, dividends are issued by when you own stock. Those dividends are not going to be taxable to you as your account is growing unless you take money out from the account. If you leave the account alone, the 401k that you've amassed, and you keep contributing to it, not only are you currently reducing your income by the amount of contribution you've made. So as Dennis mentioned, if you make $50,000 a year and you put in $5,000 into the 401k account, it reduces the $50,000 down to $45,000, and that's all you're going to be taxed on, assuming no other income, of course. And then that $5,000 goes towards your retirement. So as that account is growing, it is growing tax-free until the time comes to take the distributions out. Now, so that is a 401k.
A traditional 401k.
A traditional 401k that is offered through the employers. Now, what does the match mean?
Yeah, so the match is as an incentive to participating. Employers will typically dangle a little carrot as an extra employee benefit
Right.
to get you to contribute. And they'll say, hey, if you put in at least 5%,
Yeah.
we'll put in 5%.
Okay.
Oh, that's great. And that's every employer is different. Some will not offer a match. Some will offer less. Some will offer more. And I think, too, at this level, and we're just using the example of a traditional 401k, this is an area where I see people get jammed up all the time.
Right.
Because, but my employer also offers a Roth
Right.
401k.
Right.
Which should I do?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we had a crystal ball, we could answer that definitively. If we knew where tax rates were going, if we knew where their income was going long term. But in general, a Roth is going to make more sense.
Yeah.
Oftentimes earlier in your career when you're in a lower income tax bracket.
Right.
As your income goes up and you're in a higher tax bracket, it's kind of like a bird in the hand, right? If I put money into my traditional 401k, I know for a fact I'm getting a tax benefit today.
Yep, that's right.
Whereas the Roth, I'm kind of taking maybe a guess here that my tax rate in retirement might actually be higher than my tax rate today. And so I'm going to forego any type of a deduction today and just let my money go into not just a tax-deferred bucket, which is the pre-tax 401k, but to put it into a tax-free bucket that can grow tax-free indefinitely and doesn't even get taxed when the money comes out. Correct. But you're losing the benefit. You're losing the tax deduction today. Right. And people, start to all of a sudden get a little nauseous when we start talking pre-tax, post-tax.
Yes.
So it is something I try to be, try to explain as simply as I can. But at the end of the day, even for me, when I'm sitting down with a client, I'm running a tax projection to see what does this actually shake out at?
Yeah.
You foregoing a pre-tax contribution, what are we actually giving up?
Right.
Does this make sense?
Yeah. And to again go back, the 401k, it gives you that deduction and lowers that $50,000 to $45,000, the $5,000 contribution. A Roth IRA, on the other hand,
or Roth 401.
If you make a contribution to a Roth, you're not going to reduce that $50,000 to $45,000, but when you take that money out and you retire, then it's tax-free.
Tax-free. What you see is what you get.
What you see is what you get.
Whereas for somebody who's, accumulated a big nest egg in a pre-tax 401k or a traditional IRA, both pre-tax vehicles, what you see is not what you get. Because whatever's coming out, I mean, you could almost pencil in your head that 20% of that right off the bat is going to be going to taxes. And again, that number is going to change depending on what's actually coming out.
Yeah, and what's the rate.
But that money's still taxable. It has not been taxed yet.
Yeah. So those are the considerations, and those are really hard considerations to make for somebody who is in their 20s. I mean, I'm 34, so even for me, you're trying to crystal ball, as you said, what your tax rate is going to be when you retire, because a traditional 401k is going to be taxable when you take the money out, and a Roth 401k or Roth IRA will not be taxed when it's coming out. And again, during its growth stages, it's still not taxable, correct?
Correct.
So, those are the considerations, and that's really important to mention those differences, because we hear those terms, again, all over social media.
Yep.
Roth IRA, 401k, contribute. Now, what about limits as to how much you can contribute? Is there a cap on the 401k?
Yeah, and the 401k in 2022, it's $20,500.
Okay.
For your employee contribution. Now, some companies offer a profit sharing where they can technically put a little bit more.
Yeah.
Also, for those that are older, they could put in an extra $6,000 on top of that.
The catch up, right?
Yeah, the catch up. But in general, and listen, if you can get even close to that max, you're probably going on the right trajectory.
Yeah.
IRAs have different limitations, and then there's also income limitations on these things as well. So it really is it can be overwhelming to make these decisions. And I think that kind of goes back to, and for the people that are just feeling stuck, there are advisors out there that get paid even just on an hourly basis that have no product to sell that can help you back into these answers. The XY Planning Network comes to mind.
Right.
So that's a group of it. I'm not a member of that, but I'm singing their praises because I've seen people benefit from using advisors.
Right.
These are advisors that get paid $150 an hour, but can help you back into some of these decisions, because at the end of the day, it might not be all or nothing. It might not be just traditional, just Roth.
Yeah.
It might be maybe split the difference.
Yeah.
Maybe you're hedging a little bit, taking some benefit today, but also foregoing some for the future benefit of the Roth.
Split it up.
This nuance is huge. There's the answer is typically going to be in the gray area. What you're putting into a 401k, well, should you also contribute to an IRA?
Right.
I don't know. Maybe we were putting too much money into retirement accounts, and you should actually, and we didn't even get to it, but start exploring a taxable brokerage account to give yourself some flexibility with those dollars. So the answer is always going to be pretty unique to the person you're working with, their income, their life, their circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the other things that's important when you're talking about the consultant here, so many other things in life that may affect that decision. For example, if you're renting at the moment and you want to buy a home, well, maybe you don't want to put $5,000
totally
into an account.
Yeah.
Right. Of any sort. That's for the future, because current you is trying to buy a house.
Right.
And so if you had $5,000, maybe you could have put that towards a down payment.
That's it.
Fund or put it away. So lots of considerations.
There's no cut and dry answers here.
There's no cut and dry answer. But, people do want to understand the basics and move towards that taxable account, because the other option outside of tax deferred or future you, we'll call it, accounts such as retirement, is current you.
Sure.
And that, to me, from my experience with my own clients, when I guide and I advise them whether they create a SEP IRA, which is for self-employed people, or a profit sharing, something like that. But again, the calculation is, do I want to reward my current self, right, and spend whatever it is, $100,000 that I was going to contribute on myself, or do I want to go and spend that on my future self? That $100,000 will probably be whatever, call it 500,000.
Yeah, but maybe you can't touch it for some decades because there's penalties and things coming. Yeah.
So many considerations here, but
I think that taxable brokerage account, right, is almost that in between option.
Yeah. So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
What is a taxable brokerage account compared to a 401k?
Yeah. So a 401k in particular, for somebody that's like our age, I turned 34 in February, so we're about the same age. So if we're putting money into that account, you and I, we can't touch that money until we're 59 and a half.
Yeah.
Without a 10% penalty and paying the income tax on it.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big disincentive to touch that money.
Absolutely. You don't want to pay that penalty.
No.
Yeah.
If you're putting the money in, you should be pretty damn sure you're not going to be touching it.
Yeah, that's an important point too.
Yeah. So you don't want to, again, you don't want to over contribute just because Dennis and Yuri said you got to save this amount. And all of a sudden now you find yourself in a bind and wow, I wish I didn't put that much in.
Right.
Well, I think that the taxable brokerage account is, the way I think about those is that could be long-term money.
Right.
But it also might be money that you need within, I'd say, no less than 5 years from now. No less than, so if you're putting money in, because if you're putting money into a taxable brokerage account, I'm assuming you're going to be investing it.
Right. Right.
And what we just saw, right, if you invested that money a year ago, and now all of a sudden you need the money now, and the markets are down 25% this year.
Ooh, yeah.
Oh,
good point.
Wow. Why did I invest this money? And now, my $10,000 is only $7,500 and I'm pulling it out. No, that money you should have at least, and I would say ideally closer to like a 7-year plus outlook.
Okay.
When I have people contributing to a taxable brokerage account, oftentimes we're still talking about that being long-term money.
And that makes sense.
Yeah, because things are volatile and you're just trying to give yourselves, because let's also think about it too, right? If this does end up being money where, let's just flash forward, you put money in today,
right,
and 10 years from now, you thought you might need it for that new car purchase, or you thought you might need it to supplement the down payment on the home that you're getting. But you get there, and over that period of time, you realize I was able to save up separately, and I actually don't need that money. Well, now all that money is cooking for a long term. And it gives you an option when you turn, whenever you become financially independent and are no longer relying on, your paycheck. Some people would say retired. I'm trying to retire the word retired. But when you get to that point where you need to now live on your investments,
right,
it's giving your taxable brokerage account is an account that is taxed differently.
Yes.
Than your pre-tax 401k or pre-tax traditional IRA and your Roth. It's based around the capital gains tax system as opposed to ordinary income.
Right.
But yeah, I would not, any of the money that's going in there, that's 7+ year money in my mind.
Yeah. And
I think, and one thing that we didn't really, touch on is for a taxable brokerage account in particular, unlike a 401k, we mentioned how there's like a target date default fund.
I was gonna go there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
So like, all right, you open up a taxable brokerage account. What do you invest in?
I was gonna say this is exactly where I was gonna go next.
Yes.
So that's perfect. A great segue. And so yeah, you open up the taxable brokerage account. Now, unlike the 401k, where there's a default setting that is some sort of mutual fund that's
Broadly diversified, passively managed, low fee.
Exactly. Now here you open up a taxable account, and there's a lot of ways you can go. I'll tell you right now from my experience. I put a couple $1,000s into one a few years ago, and go robo investor.
Love it.
Because I'll be honest with you, I know absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
To me, the money that I put in there is play money. Sure. Right. So meaning I'm not expecting to get that money. I'm not expecting to touch that money. If I, God forbid, needed that money, that would be something really bad in my opinion.
Right.
So that's why I just let it go and put it there. But what are the options? Because when you go into those platforms, man, Charles Schwab, Vanguard, whatever.
It's the Wild West.
It is like so overwhelming.
Yeah.
I just want to take my money back out.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, okay, what do I do now? So the robo investor asked me all those questions about what
your time horizon, your risk tolerance. Yep.
It created an allocation. Put my 5,000 into different buckets, and that's it. And I let it go. So what do you advise or guide your clients if they do open up a taxable account? Where do you even get started once you're in that platform and that money is there?
Yeah. I love that you brought up robo-advisory because I think for the overwhelming majority of people, that's going to be a great option for them.
Yeah.
Because it's taking out exactly what we just talked about, the guesswork as to what to invest in. Because they could roll the dice and put it all in Amazon stock, which is, in my personal opinion, as high risk of it. And listen, there's probably a penny stock out there that's higher risk. So maybe we could be rationally optimistic that Amazon will be better 30 years from now than not. But it's a single position.
Correct.
Whereas in the strategy that you just described, a robo-advisor, you're getting the entire universe of the global stock market. So it's not just the S&P 500, the largest 500 companies in the U.S. No, you're also getting the small cap companies.
Yeah.
You have exposure to over 30, and I don't know which robo-advisor you use.
Charles Schwab.
Charles Schwab. Okay. I custody my clients' assets with Charles Schwab, and they have the intelligent portfolios, which is what you use.
Yeah.
In that, you're investing in 3,500 global companies of all different sizes.
That's awesome.
All different geographies. So if geopolitically something's happening in one place, you're hedging in another place. And maybe you also have some exposure to real estate. So you're in that strategy, which I love.
Yeah.
And I'm really happy to hear that you're doing that. You're not saying, I think this is the best. I think that's the best.
Yeah.
I think this is a winner. I think that's a loser. You're saying, I want to participate in capitalism.
Yeah. Yep. That's it.
I'm rationally optimistic that we're not going to a post-apocalyptic state.
Yeah.
And I want exposure because I can't guess which asset class is going to outperform or be the winner. No. And you know what? When you actually look at that, if you look at the past 20 years, what was the best performer last year versus the year before that versus the year before that? You start to see, all right, this year was emerging markets. They were the best performer. Then the next year was the worst performer.
Yeah.
And then, this year, REITs were the best performer, and then the next year they're the worst performer.
Yeah.
We can't guess.
No.
Right? And there are hedge funds out there. There are investment, managers out there that get paid lots of money.
Millions.
But consistently underperform what you do.
Yeah.
Over 80% of them underperform the strategy that you laid out and what you're doing with a robo-advisor.
Yeah.
So I think that for the average person, a taxable brokerage account, that is the way to go.
Yeah.
And I think at the end of the day, if you follow anything like Stoicism, right, they always say this one thing, control what you can control. You can control how much you save and how much you invest. You can control how you diversify so that you're not overly concentrated. You can also control the fees you pay.
Right.
And in a strategy that you just described, that's going to be full of low expense fund that's giving you global exposure.
Yeah. ETFs, mutual funds,
Yep.
emerging markets, small cap. All these things are very confusing terms.
Sure.
And I would love to get a light note about each of them from you. But what I want to say is, to me, when it comes to these taxable accounts, taxable brokerage accounts, I'll be honest with you, I haven't even looked at that account.
Yeah, I try not to look at mine either. Yeah.
Because I don't care.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not going to make any moves.
Nope.
If the stock market tanks. I see people panicking, and I mean, I understand if you have a lot of money tied up in those things. But to me, I put the money in there. Put $5,000 4 years ago. I have no idea what it is now. I probably should take a look, but I don't really care. Because at the end of the day, if the trajectory is up and I don't need it,
Yeah.
that's the idea to me. Because if you ever needed it, you would have to sell off some of that portfolio,
Right.
which may result in a gain, or even if it has a gain, that means you have a tax impact to that.
Sure.
And now you're getting less money than you would have otherwise had it just sat in a savings account.
Yep.
So can we real quickly just chat about those couple options inside of a taxable account? What is an ETF? What is a mutual fund? Walk us through those kind of categories and what they mean.
Yeah. So broadly speaking, like intelligent portfolios or these robo-advisors, when they're constructing a portfolio, they're going to be comprised of, most recently, ETFs.
Okay.
Everything used to be like if you wanted to invest in the S&P 500, which if you watch the news, if you watch CNBC, they're letting you know if the S&P 500 is up or down today.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Right. Or the Dow and the NASDAQ. Those are things like that's the noise.
Yeah.
It's now we're talking about funds that actually, in the case of the S&P 500, are a reflection of all those underlying companies. So it's essentially like the S&P 500, for instance, there could be a mutual fund. That's the S&P 500 mutual fund, where you're investing in those 500 companies, market cap weighted. So what that means is like Apple's the biggest company in that. So Apple's going to have pro rata, it's a larger amount. And then maybe we see Amazon, Facebook, Google, Netflix, these other companies that are just massive, all having an exposure, a market cap weighting is just reflected one for one in a fund.
I see. Okay. Interesting.
So that could be in the form of a mutual fund, which is really going to be something that only trades once a day. It's not going to have volatility through the day.
Right.
And then the other option would be to have an ETF, which is the same thing. The S&P 500 fund, you're going to have the same weighting of Apple in both of the S&P 500 funds, whether it's mutual fund or ETF.
Right.
An ETF, the only real difference is that it's an exchange traded fund in the sense that in the middle of the day, you could trade an ETF. Now, ETFs also are more tax efficient. So I think that's a lot of the personal finance world is starting to move towards ETFs.
Interesting.
For the flexibility, the tax efficiency.
What makes it tax efficient?
What makes a mutual fund not tax efficient is that they have to reconstitute the fund at certain periods of time where you get these capital gain distributions that get kicked out in lumpier ways.
I see.
So it's actually that ETFs, they avoid that.
Gotcha.
So when a quarter goes by and maybe Apple outperformed by this much, at the end of the quarter, the fund needs to reconstitute the index to have Apple weighted appropriately. So they need to sell some, they need to buy some of different positions. And in a mutual fund, that's done in a more tax inefficient way.
I see.
But then to your point about different asset classes, right? So we're just talking about the S&P 500.
Yeah.
That's all large cap.
Yeah.
Those are the largest 500 companies in the United States. Those are domestically the largest 500 companies. Well, then you also have what's actually historically the highest performing asset class, small cap.
Interesting. Which is what?
Which is, I think technically it ends up being for if they have under 20 billion of, I guess that would end up being gross revenue.
Okay. Yeah.
You'd have to look that up. I don't exactly know where those cutoffs are. But I think the idea being, right, let's think about what it takes. And Apple has continued to defy reality in some ways. But what does it take Apple? I think they're a $2 trillion company now.
Yeah.
What does it take Apple to become a $4 trillion company?
Right.
They need to come up with something even more innovative than an iPhone,
Wow.
right? To double. Now let's talk about the company that's a $100 million company.
Right.
What does it take for them to become a $200 million company?
I see.
So historically, small cap has been more volatile. There's more companies that go out of business. They're more impacted by changes in the financial environment.
Right.
But they also have the ability to double, triple, quadruple a little bit easier. And that over time, if we go back to the Great Depression to now, they've done that. They've done just that. They've outperformed.
And they are considered riskier.
Totally.
By this phenomenon, but they also tend to pay more dividends. Is that right? Or
not necessarily. Not necessarily. Yeah, they are more volatile.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things. Like if it's an advisor and not if it's a person, an individual like yourself that can sit on your hands,
right.
And when things get choppy, you can just ride it out and say, "I'm not looking at it."
Right.
Small cap has rewarded investors, but again, that's only we just talked about two asset classes. There's also real estate, and I know you've done a rehab, right? And you put money in. that is almost like, in a sense, is almost like buying Amazon stock, right? You put a whole bunch into one bucket.
True.
Whereas another alternative, and this isn't that there's right or wrong.
Yeah.
It's that for the person that maybe doesn't want to get their hands dirty, doesn't know how to sheetrock like you,
Right.
is actually going to go and say, I want to buy a REIT, a real estate investment trust, which is just buying a whole bunch of different real estate. Maybe it's storage facilities, commercial properties, individual, multifamilies. That's all kind of basketed into one fund.
Right.
They're not going in and fixing the toilet.
Yeah.
But they're still getting exposure to the asset class.
Right. Yeah, I love that. The alternative to that is something called syndication.
Totally.
In the real estate world, which I deal with a lot.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, the options of investing are so endless.
Yeah.
And it's almost difficult to even like start in the topic sometimes. So this is really good how trying to keep it light here and jumping around on a lot of topics, but all related because really it's such an open world. Out there.
And it only continues to be with the democratization of these platforms. Like you can invest in farmland now.
Right.
You could invest in art. You could invest in crypto. Like the options are endless, but I would actually just go back to the point that you brought up.
Yeah.
A robo-advisory.
Yeah.
For 9 out of 10 people that are looking to do something.
Yeah.
Don't listen to, Uncle Fred about what the best investment is and put your money in there.
Yeah. Or worse yet, social media, TikTok Finance 101.
Yeah. Do the tried and true methods of just diversifying yourself, hedging your risk and playing a long game.
Yeah. And diversification goes back to allocating your portfolio into things that you're comfortable with. And to me, that's why I love the robo fund.
Sure.
Robo investor, intelligent investor, whatever it's called. Because again, if you don't know much about the market, you don't really want to do the research, because I feel like doing the research on the market is like a full-time job.
And people who do it full-time, like I said, still underperform over 80% of the time.
Right. So yeah, exactly. So
you think you can beat them?
Yeah. You think you can beat those people whose full-time job it is. You just go on this robo investor and put the money in. And I think one of the biggest things, you keep seeing all these meme stocks.
Oh, yeah.
Like the AMC where that happened, and people made a lot of money.
And people lost a lot of money.
And people lost even more money.
Yeah.
That. So I think, jumping in on these bandwagon trains, crypto, I think, is another big thing that's out there that is scary if you don't understand it.
Sure.
I think that part is very challenging.
Yeah.
For many people, because you're just ripped in so many directions, but simplicity wins.
Well, I think with anything, kind of like how we said you start with the emergency fund.
Yeah.
I would say the same thing when it gets into this investing kind of a thing, right? Most investors shouldn't even be thinking about these concentrated positions, whether it is crypto or single stock purchasing or farmland or any of these things. Those are all tangential.
Right.
You want to have the plain vanilla buttoned up.
Yeah.
And then, when I have clients that come in and they say, I feel good about this, and insert X, whatever it is. Maybe it's something they heard on TikTok. I don't know.
Probably.
But we might carve out 5 to 10 to even upward sometimes of 15% of their portfolio.
Right.
To do that kind of stuff. I'm not saying no.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But let's make sure we bat down the hatches with the fundamentals, and that's the non-negotiable, and that can do its work for us. And we can stretch for some of the moonshot meme stocks even. Like, I don't care.
Right.
Whatever you feel good about, if we need to get some exposure and that'll help you feel like you've got skin in the game on something that you feel good about, let's just not sacrifice the fundamentals to get that exposure.
I love that. Let's turn gears a little bit. You have a kid. I have a kid. Our kids are actually about the same age.
Yeah.
And we're about the same age. So, it's pretty.
Here we are.
And here we are. And the question that I get a lot from my clients very often is this 529 plan, especially people with the younger kids, talking about education, talking about, should they put it into a 529 plan, or should they just open up a taxable account or whatever it is for their kids separately so that there's less restriction. So can you give everybody, the listeners, a basics of the 529 plan, and when does it make sense versus when does it not make sense?
Yeah. The 529 is a solid vehicle for saving for education expenses, but let's be specific.
Right.
It's specifically for education expenses.
Correct.
Right. So that's that thing where people are like, well, what if my kid gets a full scholarship? Well, these are the things we need to be thinking about. Do we want to fund enough for them to go to a 4-year private university and medical school and, everything?
Who knows?
Maybe not. Yeah. I mean, so a 529, similar to a 401k, will, on the money going in, depending on what state you live in, let's be
Correct.
clear, have a deduction for your state,
Correct.
not a federal deduction. So if in New Jersey, this just recently changed, if you're a New Jersey resident and you participate in the New Jersey 529 plan, because all states have a 529 plan.
Right.
But for the long time, if you lived in New Jersey, you didn't get a state tax benefit for
right.
putting money in there. So a lot of my clients, we were using a Utah plan that just had great funds and low fees.
Yeah.
And I would even say that the plan in New Jersey is just like okay.
Yeah.
And the state tax deduction just is okay. That like it's still not clear. But long story short, the money you put in there,
Yeah.
like a 401k, will grow tax deferred. However, if that money comes out
Yeah.
and is used for qualified education expenses, and that's a very specific definition. I'm not just saying that offhand, but there's a very specific definition for qualified education expenses.
That's right.
And that can even now be between K through 12. If your kid goes to a private school, you can use $10,000 a year to go towards that.
Interesting.
Or for university. But is it the only option? No. And do you want to fund it? I mean, personally, like in the college industrial complex, we both went to a state school. So,
Correct.
We probably have peers that paid twice as much,
Yep.
where their families paid twice as much for university, and they're carrying twice as much if they had student loans, things like that.
Yeah.
As a parent, when I'm thinking about my son and what that's going to look like, I'm kind of also like trying to make sure he understands that college and that route, the linear path that has been so common in the US of going from high school directly to college.
Yeah.
That's not your only option, dude.
Yeah.
And so that also just means for me, and I have this conversation with clients, maybe the 529 is one funding vehicle,
Right.
not the entire thing.
Yeah. So what happens if you end up taking money out down the line? Let's just say you've been saving up, you've been putting the money in, kid's ready for college, but says, hey, I'm actually starting up my company. Right. Now all that money has been in there, sitting in there, $100,000. Does it mean if you take it out, there's a penalty on it?
So if it's not used for qualified education expenses, the gains, the growth.
Oh, wow.
So if you put in $50,000 and now it, grew to $100K, so there's a $50,000 growth.
Yeah.
What comes out on that is taxable, and if it's not used for qualified education, kind of like a 401k, it gets hit with a 10% penalty.
Wow.
But in that situation, for the parent whose child gets to age 18 and they want to go to the military, they want to start a company, they want to travel for whatever period of time, they're not going to college.
Yeah.
That parent can change the beneficiary
Oh.
to their sibling. And now let's say this second sibling, there's two kids, and the second sibling, same exact thing happens. Well, then the parents need to make a decision.
Yeah.
And there is some verbiage in the rules that do, and I'm actually like not fully all the details, but in those circumstances where you can start to take some money. But more often for my clients that definitely have financial abundance more often than not,
Yeah.
we start then talking about the next generation. We say, hey,
Right.
grandma, grandpa, we can now change these beneficiaries, and wow, you just pre-funded grandkids college. So if they have the ability, the financial flexibility to not have to use those funds for something, we can then just leave those dollars cooking, tax deferred, and change the beneficiaries to grandchildren.
And just let it sit there. That's interesting. So you can let it sit invested.
Yeah.
And you just don't touch it.
Yeah.
You can leave that money in there.
Keep it cooking.
And then when they have kids,
Yep.
you say,
The beneficiary is no longer your dad, it's you.
Yeah. Can I got to ask something else, because this just came to my mind. With all these accounts that are cooking, as you said, I feel like, I'll be honest, I feel like I got some 401ks out there, man. I jumped 7 jobs before I went out on my own.
Yeah.
I am convinced there's a friggin' 401k out there
That you don't know about.
that I don't know about, probably 3 or 4 of them, because every time you jump,
Yep.
or you switch
There's
companies,
something floating out there.
you have like 60 days or something like that to convert the 401k. You can convert it whenever. You roll it into
An IRA or a new 401k
or
if you're
a new
planning on
401.
this.
So is there a way for somebody to like find all these? How, like,
Typically a lot of the 401k plans, because they fall under ERISA, which is
Okay.
a specific retirement legislation, a lot of them do have to send some form of an annual statement to you.
okay.
So even though you're not logging into your old HR portal at that firm you used to work at,
Yeah.
you should be getting some type of a statement to just say, hey, Yuri, by the way,
It's out there.
this still exists.
Okay.
Um,
No.
Yeah, and if you haven't got that, I would probably kind of retrace footsteps and maybe just get in touch with your previous employer's HR group just to make sure you can still log in if you don't even have that stuff handy.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of people, that's one of the first things we end up doing when I sit down with somebody who's looking for advice.
Yeah.
What do we see? I mean, they might have been working for 20 plus years and they've got all these 401ks.
Right.
They had an uncle that worked for Northwestern Mutual. They had a friend that told them to set up this robo-advisory thing, and they've got all of these things, and it really becomes a process of consolidation. And that, more than anything, is going to be helpful to understand what you have.
True.
Because we talked about small cap funds, large cap funds. Well, all of these accounts might have some different allocation. If we can look at it all together and understand, hey, when we zoom out and we don't look at these accounts as 10 different accounts, but all as one, right? Your overall portfolio exposure, does this allocation make sense?
Yeah.
Right? Is this the exposure that we want based on your risk, based on your time horizon, based on your capacity to take risk? And oftentimes it doesn't because they just did a little bit of it's kind of patchwork investing.
Yeah. I opened up a random account like 2 years ago, a year ago, because I wanted to invest in something that happened to be the only account that would allow me to invest in that.
Yeah.
Now I got to shut that down.
Yep.
Because I also have another 3 accounts on the other.
Yeah.
So I'm totally with you. I think it's super important. And I want to kind of wrap up this episode now and turn it over to you to talk about your firm and how can people reach you? In what circumstance should they reach out to you, and just kind of, give yourself a little.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, man, because as we talked about, the path to becoming an advisor isn't a linear one.
Yeah.
And what kind of is now, and I think really beautiful and much overdue, is there are a lot of independent advisors that are going out there and hanging their own shingle. I mentioned XY Planning Network, where people have, advisors today have all different niches.
Yeah.
My niche, if you can even call it, is viewing money, I think, differently than most people.
Yeah.
So wealth, kind of like success, like these terms, right? What do they actually mean to us?
Right.
Completely nebulous. Wealth to me is going to mean something different from you.
For sure.
Right? Success to me, that's going to look different for you.
True.
We're all unique. And my viewpoint is, and I mentioned it earlier, is that money is a means to an end. Finances are one leg of the stool in that wealth equation.
True.
We also have our mental, physical, emotional health, our spirituality, the amount of rest we get, the relationships in our life, the degree of autonomy, of purpose that we have in our life. And I look at that as wealth.
Yeah.
When you've got that optimized, all those slices of the pie are in the best position they are for your unique life and preferences.
Very true.
That is success. That is wealth in my mind. So I work with clients that kind of view things that way and are using their finances to advance that more dynamic measure.
Right.
In general, when I work with clients, I have a conversation with anybody where people can give a call, and just over the phone, I'll see how much I can help you. Awesome. You might have some low-hanging fruit, but then if it makes sense, we do a paid appointment where we get under the hood for $2,500, go through everything, deep dive into your investments, your taxes, your estate planning, your insurance, your kids, your previous 2-year tax returns, finding mistakes. And 95% of the people that go through that process with me, I tell them not to hire me for ongoing.
That's awesome.
Right? Because I'm trying, that meeting should hopefully be the thing, like I mentioned about my wife, that educates them, informs them, and empowers them to make some changes. And I provide implementable and actionable things that they can do to get from A to B to C to D. And maybe at E, life gets a little bit more complex.
Yeah.
The stakes get higher and they think of me again. And I've built that goodwill, so they'll come back to me. But then there's the people, obviously, they go through that review. The stakes are high already.
Yeah.
And they're like, wow, I can't do all this on my own, or I didn't realize it'd be this much. I'm not a do-it-yourselfer.
Right.
And then we have a conversation about ongoing. But 95% of the people would benefit from doing kind of like I offer a one-time review or working with these advisors that do hourly consults just to make sure they're heading in the right direction.
Awesome. Awesome. And how can people reach you?
They can reach me. My website is wealthfa.com. That's WhealthThfa.com. I try to be active on Instagram. My handle is @the-Wealth-Advisor.
Yep.
And yeah, I'm always open to have a conversation. And if I'm not the man for you, I can point you in a better direction.
Awesome. And we're going to have all of Dennis's information in the show notes of the episode on YouTube right here on the bottom. Again, Dennis, thank you so much for coming in. We're going to have you back for another episode. We're going to dive into some of the topics in even more detail.
Yeah.
But this has been really great. Thank you so much for coming out.
Yeah, thank you,
And,
man. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.